Hi, everybody. Welcome to Andrea Speaks Out. I'm so glad that you've chosen to join me today. My name is Andrea, and in this episode, we're going to be discussing the impact that trauma can have on our bodies and our brains, as well as possible ways we can transform this damage so that we can become the healthiest versions of ourselves. I felt that it was important to focus on this topic for a couple of reasons. First, survivors of sexual abuse tend to carry what I call leftovers for a very long time, sometimes for a lifetime. And we can get stuck in coping patterns that they just don't help us function either in our families or in our jobs or in our relationships. They don't help us function in the most optimal ways, I guess I would say that way. Second, in a recent episode, I was talking with my wonderful guest, Julie Anderson, about trauma's impact on our body image. And I began touching on healing modalities that could maybe benefit some folks. And after that episode, I realized that I'm no expert in this field at all. Well, I realized that long before the episode. I'm not an expert, but what I realized was that it would probably be beneficial to have an expert join the show to just help explain in a little more detail the physiology behind our effects from trauma, as well as some additional healing modalities. I just thought that could help some people because the whole purpose of this podcast is to provide healing and prevention and hope. And so it's my wish with this episode that we provide some of that today. So I have asked Sue Jones to join me today. Sue is the founder of Yoga Hope and TIMBo, which she's going to explain in a few minutes. I'm really excited to have her join us today because the pearls of wisdom she's about to shine down on us are going to make us just all feel freer just by listening, I promise. Because the pearls of wisdom she's about to shine down on us are going to make us just all feel freer just by listening, I promise. So with that, I want to welcome Sue Jones. Hi, Sue.
Thank you. Hi, Andrea. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I have been following you for a long time, and I love the work you're doing. And I just think hope is the pivotal word for everything that you do. And I think everybody needs more hope right now in their lives for different reasons, and especially with this topic. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. All right, so I'm going to just start asking you a few questions and just share away if you can, okay?
Okay.
Let's start with, can you share a little bit about the research you've done about some of the effects that trauma can have on our brain and on our bodies?
Sure. The thing about trauma or having a traumatic experience is that the experience comes in through the sensory system. And when you experience a traumatic event, the part of your brain that's kind of linear and rational, the left hemisphere that can keep track of time and facts and figures, it just kind of shuts down because that is not a part of the brain that is operating along with that survival system, which is something that we're all born with. So it's really the right hemisphere, the sensory nervous system that is really recording, experiencing and recording that trauma. And what that means is that every part of your body is going to remember this traumatic experience in conjunction with all of the sensory aspects of that experience. So what I mean by that is like if you were, let's say, bitten by a dog on a rainy day near some freshly cut grass, all of those things could potentially activate your trauma response in your body. So when we're thinking about trauma and the body, trauma is not something that is a mechanism of your brain. It's actually a mechanism of your body. And your body remembers traumatic experiences. It imprints it through that sensory system. So that's the reason that is so important to understand is that there's a lot of people out there that don't remember their trauma, yet they have these trauma responses in their body. Let's say somebody who might have been sexually abused when they were too young to even, where their brain was not developed enough to actually have the capacity to store memory.
Yes.
And that can be really difficult for women or for anyone because, and I can speak from my own personal experience, there's a feeling that if you can't remember your trauma, then it's not validated, it's not real, that you're somehow making things up or you're just feeling like messed up for no good reason.
Oh, you absolutely start to think a lot of people do listening to that. And it's really difficult because you don't understand why you're reacting certain ways to certain situations, and you don't have information or proof to back it up, so you start to feel a little crazy.
Right. And so this is why understanding how trauma is remembered in the body and how trauma kind of is activated in the body. This is one of the reasons why it's really important to understand that. You asked a question about how trauma impacts the brain. The short answer to that is that when your body, so if we're really recognizing, okay, trauma is imprinted in the body, right? It kind of creates this memory that gets activated when certain situations replicate that original trauma, and it creates a groove, right? I've heard people explain sort of like you have this, if you imagine like a dirt path that's been traveled, this groove. So every time you travel down that path, it's just easier and easier to go down the same groove.
Yes, and the groove is created in the brain.
That's right.
Okay.
What happens is that it impacts your brain in this way. And I just want to explain, it relates to mind-body practices. Over time, when your body is having this implicit trauma memory or trauma activation over and over, even to the point where you don't really understand what's happening or even recognize it because it's become your normal, the parts of your brain that are really, really crucial for things like emotion regulation, discernment in decision making, empathy, all of those things that help you maintain balance and be able to make good decisions, they actually become determined by your brain and body to be non-essential. And the reason for that is because when your life is really in danger, which is really what a trauma is, your body's perception that your life is in danger. And what that means is that when your brain and your body are having this response that feels like your life is in imminent danger, those are not considered essential. What is considered essential is the survival response and doing something to get out of that situation. Yeah. What it means in the long term is that, for someone who, let's say, has complex trauma or PTSD, what that means in the long term is that it then becomes increasingly difficult to access those areas of the brain. And that's where we start to see this hypervigilance, hyperreactivity, just constant feelings of fear, isolation,
anxiety,
shame. Right, anxiety. And then you just kind of get stuck there.
That makes so much sense. It makes sense to me internally, in my head, in my mind, emotionally. Everything just fits so much. It's so nice to have an explanation on that level.
Right.
Because
I'll tell you, when we start explaining this, just the science of it to women, I'll tell you when we start explaining this, just the science of it to women in, let's say, substance abuse recovery, there's immediate feeling of relief because they start to understand that they're not just fundamentally broken, that their body has just wired itself in this way.
Right.
And it, like right away, just that normalizes things for them.
And I've talked about this before, that validation is just so key in the beginning parts of your journey to healing. And when you can feel validated like this, that you're not crazy and that there's an explanation for why. And we were talking one episode about dissociating and how it's really this defense mechanism that helps you survive a horrible event. But when you keep repeating this pattern, it just doesn't serve you anymore. But a lot of us just don't know any other way. We don't know how to get out of it. And so it's just good to know that because we're creating these grooves in our brain from repeated patterns too, and repeated responses from the body, that we're going to need a little extra help, like filling in the dirt path a little. Right. I think, is that part of brain plasticity? Is that part of, I've heard a little bit about that. I don't know if.
Absolutely. It's absolutely neuroplasticity. Changing, there are ways to actually work with the body and change the neural circuitry of your brain and body, which is pretty amazing.
It is incredible. And I think it's really important for anyone struggling with these things, and again, not really just trauma, so many different things, to remember that it might not be necessarily true that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That there are options and resources out there to help us rewire. It's going to be work, but that it's possible to find a new way. I think that's great. Are there any other things that you can share about how some of the long-term effects show up in our lives or in our...
Oh, gosh, absolutely. Well, I'll speak in terms of sexual trauma because that's basically my wheelhouse, because every woman we work with has a history of sexual trauma, whether they're identified as, struggling with homelessness or addiction or whatever. That is the common denominator, and I include myself in that group of women. Mm-hmm. So one of the ways that an example of how experiencing sexual trauma and then kind of going through that process where you're sort of hardwiring these trauma responses, how that shows up in times when it doesn't serve you, is the example that you gave of dissociation. When somebody experiences, especially early childhood sexual trauma, and their body has brilliantly learned to dissociate in order to keep them safe, it can actually be something that happens to women when they're actually in healthy, loving relationships. Frustrating because, especially in regards to sexual intimacy, in order to really be in that experience in a very healthy way, you have to be in your body, which is the opposite of dissociation. Right. And you have to be willing to be in that vulnerable space in order to experience really the beauty of intimacy. But what happens is any number of things can trigger a survivor's body and they'll dissociate. And then if the intimacy of a survivor's body and they'll dissociate, and then if the intimacy or the sexual interaction continues, it's a re-traumatization. So it's actually just creating a deeper groove.
Yes.
It takes a lot, like you said, it takes a lot of work to navigate through that experience and recognize, when your body is responding and giving yourself, using tools that you might have gained to make different choices in that experience. But it's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And then sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, inappropriate sexual situation, like when you're a child or something like that, there's a helplessness, a powerlessness to that experience, right? Someone is doing something to you and it feels hurtful and it feels confused.
Absolutely.
And it feels completely powerless and
out of control. Yeah.
So one of the ways that it can play out in the life of a woman is she can actually become over-sexualized or promiscuous, and that is all about control. That is all about having power and control in a space that she didn't.
Absolutely.
It's not about sex or intimacy, but again, it is kind of a re-traumatization at your own hands without realizing it. So those are, you mentioned, ways of coping. Those are some maladaptive coping mechanisms that develop, and those are just a couple examples.
They're great examples, though. This is just really helpful to hear. Thank you for sharing those. Can you tell us a little bit about what Yoga Hopa is? What inspired you to create it?
I get this question all the time. I before I really talk about that, I would say the inspiration for me to create, and that the inspiration for you to write your book came from.
Oh,
right?
wow.
It came from this place of, I'm a survivor and I can't be the only one.
Yeah.
I'm
Amen.
not the only woman that's been through this experience. I'm not the only woman that feels this way about myself, because I had come to a point in my life where I felt so completely broken that I nearly took my own life. Because that's what trauma does. It just erodes your soul. It just, you just end up feeling like such a broken person.
I do know. You are right.
And when I found yoga, the way I felt about myself started to change. And I don't want to say it was only yoga. It was yoga and connection and community and being with other women. And I thought to myself, if this can help me, if I can help others understand that this is not who they are, who they think they are is not, then I can actually help others help others. Do you know what I'm saying?
That is beautiful. Yes. And every time you help somebody else, another layer of healing gets created of yourself.
Right. And
So
then
much.
I wanted to help others, but more than that, I wanted to help others
Yeah.
because of exactly what you just said. But the first thing I had to do was take them through a process where they can actually see that they had something worthy of sharing. And that's how Yoga Hope became TIMBo, because originally we were just teaching yoga at area substance abuse recovery treatment centers and homeless organizations. And I wanted to give women something more accessible that they could use to help others after it helped themselves. And that's really where TIMBo came from.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's so, I don't know what the word is. It has like these far-reaching tentacles. None of us can change the world on our own. And the word community that you used is so true. And I feel like we have to enlist the help of others. We have to unite and work together. And it's not an ego thing. There's nothing about an individual in any of this, but we really all have the power together to make real deep change. And you are such a key player in that by creating this. And I'm just grateful. I want to say thank you like 20 times right now. I do. Its importance can't be overestimated.
Well, I agree with you. And I have to say that, one of the things that you're bringing up that is really, really important is this idea of community and connection. And even just, you and I don't know each other super well, but like there's a connection we feel because we know that we've both been through some really tough experiences.
Right.
And just that, and just
right.
And just that, and just being able to, without needing to give details,
right?
Just being able to, it's the whole Me Too thing. Mm-hmm. When you can say Me Too to a woman, or a woman can say Me Too to you, you feel there's a connection. Yeah,
a deep one. And no story needs to be shared. It's this nod, a nod on 16 levels. Yep, I see you and I get you, and that's just really great.
I mean, I would say that my biggest motivating factor when I was developing TIMBo was I wanted to create places where that could happen, where women could really, really connect with one another and feel connected and empowered and healed. And at the same time, they didn't have to sit around and talk about the details of their trauma story.
Yes, that's great. So tell us more about what TIMBo is.
So TIMBo originally started as a defined curriculum, that had a specific number of sessions, and it had a workbook it still does, has a workbook that went along with it, and it was designed to be a peer-to-peer program. So it was designed, I knew I was going to pilot it at a woman's prison here in Massachusetts.
Wow.
Everything that went into it is appropriate for a woman that's in prison.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Why? That is so cool. And I would love to just hear why that was going to be your first stop at a women's prison.
Well, what had happened was when we were Yoga Hope, which we're changing our name. So that's why I keep saying we're Yoga Hope.
Okay.
When we were Yoga Hope and just doing yoga, someone had reached out to me. One of the clinicians at the prison had reached out to me and said, I'm interested in talking with you about bringing, your program in. And it didn't really resonate with them, this idea of just coming in and teaching yoga. That it would be different today because it's a different time now. This is 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But when I developed TIMBo and took it through the first round of piloting and refined it and everything, I remembered that woman. This was probably about 5 years after that first connection. And I let her know, hey, we have this program now. It's a curriculum. You sent her the workbook. And there was immediate interest. And she immediately put me in touch with the clinical director of the prison, who I sat down with. And we really talked about the fact that this was really perfect for the prison. It was trauma informed. It was gender responsive, which is really important. And that's how we got the prison, saying they really wanted us to work with them. So
that's
when
awesome.
So when I was doing my final, had in mind, like everything in this program has to be accessible and appropriate for a woman that is in prison.
Wow. So, and what does TIMBo stand for?
So TIMBo stands for Trauma Informed Mind Body Program. And when I started explaining about TIMBo, that is how TIMBo was born, as a curriculum, as a program, as a peer-to-peer program. But what has happened in the last 7 years since we started training people is we would have clinicians, teachers, general public, women, massage therapists, occupational therapists, like professional women coming to our training. And when they left our training, first of all, 100% of those women had trauma that they did not really recognize or understand still lived in their body.
Wow.
So that was a huge realization. Like just because you're a clinician or a psychiatrist or a teacher, it doesn't mean that you don't have places to heal in you, just like anybody else.
Right.
And then second, what we really learned was these women were going back into their work lives and then coming back and reporting to me, I'm not using your curriculum, right? Because the curriculum it doesn't fit in every organization. Yeah. But they would come back and they would say, I'm not using your curriculum, but this training totally changed my life, and it completely changed the way I'm working with my clients, my patients, the way I'm interacting with my colleagues, and you have to get this into this organization. Everybody in this organization needs it. But the question was, well, how do we do that when it's not really the actual curriculum is not really good fit, meaning like meeting once a week and da-da-da. So then we started deconstructing the curriculum and the trainings that we run and codifying a method and a theory. And so now I have to say I am very excited that we have actually started to work with organizations with the ultimate intention of really shifting the culture of that organization so that everybody experiences an elevation and well-being and some recovery and connection and better relationships.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's a real exciting time for us.
Oh, I'm so excited for you. I'm excited for all the community. And is it throughout Massachusetts?
We're actually in a couple of places in Massachusetts, but we're also working with an organization in Marietta, Georgia, that works with women sexual assault survivors, domestic abuse survivors, elder abuse survivors. So we're working with that organization.
Wow.
It's called Live Safe Resources. And we're also working with the Washington, D.C. area's largest homeless organization. It's called N Street Village. So we're kind of all over the place. We're just going to go where people see the value of TIMBo.
And part of the program, part of the curriculum or the theory and the practice, do you do a combination of, do you do the explaining that you kind of did in the beginning of this episode of the impact of trauma on your body, and you do some yoga and you do mindfulness? Like, what are some of the components?
Do we talk a little bit about how trauma impacts your body? Yes. In the curriculum, we do talk about that in a very accessible way.
Yeah.
Just
the trainings with future providers.
Right.
Okay.
So, let's say, for example, if you wanted to come to our training, it would be a real deep dive into the science, the theory, the method. But in the program, it's more of just an introduction and an overview of your body's biology and how it actually is impacted by trauma.
Okay, so general understanding enough to help a person move forward.
Enough to normalize the experience, from the very start. And then the way that the components of the program are, first and foremost, a way to understand why your body responds the way that it does in a compassionate way. So,
that's a key phrase right there.
Key. So to use your
my goodness, that's such a hard one for some of us, where you just get. I have in the past just judged myself, like standing so harsh with the different reactions. When I used to dissociate a lot, I'd get so angry and hopeless. and why can't I be better? It's been so long, things like that. And so with viewing, understanding with compassion, I think would be such a gift in itself.
Well, you're right. It is so hard, and it's so natural for us to judge ourselves because we just want to be able to, quote, be normal,
Yes.
But this kind of brings me to kind of one of the second, I would say this is definitely an unintended yet very powerful aspect of TIMBo, is that it creates a language. So I'll give you an example from my life. My wife, who
Yes.
has also been through the TIMBo program and training, and she knows the language of TIMBo. And this language piece is so important because there have been times when I've dissociated, and I'm so frustrated with myself and frustrated with my body, and I'll say out loud to her, I just feel like my body's my enemy. And she uses TIMBo language with me and says, your body is brilliant. Think about what it learned to do to keep you alive, to keep you, to allow you to survive. She said, you need to be with this experience right now and just feel it and appreciate how brilliant your body is.
Okay, that makes me want to cry. I need a minute. Oh my gosh, that's okay. I know we're supposed to be talking right now, but wow, that is so healing and validating and beautiful. I'm so glad you have that and have created it. And I have to say, it's so interesting because the last episode, I used that very phrase where I said I used to feel like my body was my enemy. So I really, right now, my jaw's on the floor saying, this is incredible time. And you can continue now. I'm collecting myself.
Well, I'm crying too, so.
It's just great. And I get it. I understand how useful it would be for partners to have a common language. And we're going to have a separate episode where I'm going to talk to partners of survivors. I think it's really important. I don't think they have enough resources and support.
I agree.
And imagine for both parties if they had this common language so that the partners understand what the heck is going on with her right now, or him. Male survivors too, obviously. What? We're just here. I'm not going to hurt this person. I'm not the one. There's a lot of anger, I think, and frustration out of a lack of understanding of what that experience is. If that partner could have that understanding and language, I think relationships could soar, and
I
move
agree
past
with you.
so much.
In fact, this is actually what happens when women are actually changing their relationships, and it's changing their partners or their husbands. And I've even had an opportunity to talk with some of these partners, even the men, and they've said one of our facilitators, she's a survivor of sexual assault. Her daughter's a survivor of sexual assault, and I met her husband recently, and he said TIMBo has healed my whole family.
Wow.
It's healed my whole family because when women go through TIMBo, and this is kind of speaks to the exponential impact of TIMBo, when women go through TIMBo, they just naturally share it with the people that they're close to. Because
that's what we do.
We
share everything, and and you share what works. And it's just, I think you're kind of a walking, I don't know what the term is. You're this walking embodiment of growth. I don't know what the term is. You're this walking embodiment of growth. And people are going to see that. It's a very dynamic world when you change. And it's going to positively impact everyone around you. And so you're healing families when you're healing women.
That's right.
Wow.
Families,
and communities.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to emphasize the connection, community, and language piece, because I also need at times to be reminded to appreciate what my body is doing in that moment, even though it might not be serving me in that moment. Because trauma takes you out of the present moment and it catapults you into that past experience. So sometimes it's really hard to access that compassionate language or look through that compassionate lens.
Yes.
And having a community. So TIMBo has really been building this supportive community so that we have a Facebook group, for instance, and you can post on that Facebook group, I'm just really struggling with very powerful feelings of shame today. And, 10, 20, 30 people that have been through TIMBo post using this language.
Oh, wow.
And I'm no exception. There are moments when I need someone to be reminding me because I'm taken back into my trauma experience, to less and less, of course. The trauma recovery is not a one and done. It's a process,
Right. Definitely. This is so great and so full of hope and optimism. And it's really good to focus on that. It feels good. It feels refreshing instead of focusing on the damage,
Right, yeah.
It's so great. And you've gone outside of the U.S. with TIMBo, haven't you?
Oh, gosh. Actually, we have, talk about impact. We brought a training to a group of community leaders in Haiti.
I would love to just have you talk about that a little.
Just to kind of set it, just kind of give you a reference point. There are 0.02 psychologists for every 100,000 people in Haiti.
Oh, wow.
There is no mental health services, resources, support, really, to speak of at all in Haiti. Yet, it is one of the most traumatized, the female population in particular is one of the most traumatized populations in the world. This is a place where rape only became against the law recently, We brought a training to a group of community leaders in Haiti, and one of those women, her name is Remise Belizaire. She was so powerfully impacted by that training that she started her own organization and has been spreading TIMBo throughout the country to the point where now she has 55 TIMBo groups happening each week across 5 regions of the country.
Wow.
And these women, because there's nothing for them, these groups are populated by like 30, 40, 50 women at a time. They are walking miles to get to this group. Sometimes they're sitting on like dirt patches out on a field.
I believe it because you're craving anything that can provide some help at that level.
Yeah. And what we've definitely learned over the years is that the peer-to-peer model or the community program model is really, really the right model for international communities that don't really have a system of mental health care. It just really works well there.
And you can see why. I think that's fantastic. So what does the future look like for TIMBo? What's in store? Do you have some things coming up?
Oh, gosh. We have a lot of things. We're really on the precipice of some big growth. And this is where our big fundraising push is coming from, needing the suspects and organizations in this country that recognize that their organizations are only as effective as the staff is healthy of those organizations.
True.
It's like a family. Like you can't expect the kids to benefit from programming they're getting or services they're getting if the parents aren't willing to look at themselves and create some changes in themselves.
Yep.
So that's really how we're looking at organizations. Like we need to interact with the staff and actually leverage TIMBo in the staff in the way that it just is naturally leveraged when any woman comes to TIMBo. They come to TIMBo and then they naturally want to share it with the people that they care about. So as we're working with these organizations, staff actually have, they go through a transformational process in our trainings, and then they go back into their organizations and they naturally start using TIMBo, not nationalizations, and they naturally start using TIMBo, not just with their clients and patients, but also with their colleagues and with each other. So we are really on the precipice of big growth in this country using that model, and excited about collecting data and really showing the impact of that. So that's one thing. And then in internationally, we have a blossoming partnership with an organization called the Haitian Adolescent Girls Network. And what they do is they bring, they literally recruit mentors, so girls from the ages of 18 to 25 that come from the poorest communities in Haiti. They train them, and then those mentors they literally go door to door in these communities looking for girls between the ages of 10 and 18 that could benefit from their programs.
Wow.
They have these community programs. So the executive director, who's an amazing woman, she has come to our TIMBo trainings, and we're talking about really getting TIMBo to every single girl that the network is seeing, which is about 3,500 girls right now, and collecting and doing a lot of research on the impact of that. Now, we do need funding for that, so we haven't, started that project yet, but it's really exciting to think about that happening sometime in the future.
That is fantastic that these girls have this chance. It's
amazing. Yeah,
it's amazing. And I'm so happy for everybody, for you, for them, for the world. I just love this focus. And it's so frustrating that funding is always the big challenge for every organization. That's so important. Funding's always a challenge, So I wish you a lot of luck with that, because you really need to keep reaching out to everybody. It's so great. Do you want to share your website information so if people have questions? It's so good. Do you want to share your website information so if people have questions or want to get in touch with you, they can?
Yeah. So the website is www.yhtimbo. That's yhtimbo.org.
YH, so like Yoga Hope. So yhtimbo.org. O-R-G. Okay.
Yeah. And there's just tons of information on there. I will point out that we did recently release a white paper that anybody that's interested in the organizational well-being work that we're doing here in the States can access. It's a free download. It's just a little hard to find. You got to go over to the more menu item and then go down to free downloads, and then you can access.
Great. Fantastic. Oh, Sue, that's great. Well, I don't know if you're familiar, but this is the time in the episode where we share a joke before we sign off. And it's usually very bad jokes and silly ones, but that are clean that we can share with our kids and family. So do you have anything that you could share with us?
Well, I have a terrible memory, but the only joke that I can remember is the one I'll share with you.
Okay.
It's a knock-knock joke.
Oh, Lord. Okay.
Okay, right?
I thought my days with those were gone once my son finally entered high school, but here we are. I'm ready.
Okay, knock, knock.
Who's there?
Interrupting cow.
Interrupting cow who?
Oh.
I heard that one so many times. And I forgot. That's funny. Oh, thank you. Okay, my turn. You ready?
Yeah.
My husband, William, actually created this one on his own. It probably is out there, but he thinks he made this up, so I'm going to give him credit. Okay. What kind of restaurants do vampires hate?
What?
Steakhouses.
That's a good one.
No, it's really not. But I've got to keep it going. So,
yeah. Well,
Sue Jones, TIMBo, Yoga Hope, so grateful for this information. I really feel this was helpful for me.
Oh, good.
And I've heard a lot of this and everything. Hearing the way you frame it all and explain it, I just feel lifted and even more hopeful. And I really hope that some people can listen to this and feel better immediately, just feeling validated and can share some of the information. I really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for who you are and for what you're doing. And, the other day I actually said that I am kind of in awe of my journey, like all of it. And I've gotten to a place where I'm grateful for my journey, even the yucky parts, because I don't think I'd be in awe of it without the yucky parts. And to be in that place is pretty mind-blowing for me, I think. And that's my wish for everyone else, that they could just be grateful for the journey and
it can. I think that you and I are living proof of that, and every woman that I see come through TIMBo is also living proof of that.
Well, thank you, Sue. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody out there, so much for listening. Have a great day. Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to others.
Thank you for having me. It was really great talking to you.
Thank you, Sue. The pleasure is all mine. If any of you have any reactions to this episode or suggestions or comments, please contact me at andreaspeaksout.com. I'd love to continue this discussion. Bye, everybody.